April 17, 2025, Western Yemen. A heat signature appeared on a Houthi radar console, fast, high, and silent. Operators assumed it was a drone, a routine intercept. They armed a pair of Syad missiles, locked on, and launched. But what they locked onto that night wasn't a drone. It was a B-2 Spirit. The U.S. Air Force's invisible sword, a flying wing of radar reflective angles, near undetectable to even the most advanced tracking systems. You don't see a B-2 bomber unless it wants to be seen. That night, it didn't. The missiles burned into the sky, but the B-2 was gone before the warheads ever reached altitude. Not shot down, not hit, simply gone. And while the Houthis were scrambling to make sense of what just happened, the Spirit kept moving, smooth, silent, and already feeding its live reconnaissance data to the Diego Garcia halfway across the Indian Ocean. What the B-2 saw that night and what it shared would spark a retaliation the world wasn't ready for. This wasn't a standard strike package. This was not a drone swarming Ross, Issa, or a destroyer launching warning shot. This was the trigger moment that led to what we now know as one of the most surgical, strategic, and devastating airstrikes in recent U.S. military history. And yes, if you've seen our breakdowns of the Ross, Issa bombing, you've seen the result. But this is the beginning. The moment the Houthis made the biggest mistake possible, they fired on the wrong aircraft. And the response wasn't just precise, it was personal. The moment the Syad missiles left their launch rails, the Houthi operators were already behind the curve. They'd tracked the heat, locked in a trajectory, and assumed they were targeting a US MQ-9 Reaper drone, a common sight above Yemen's coastline. What they didn't know was that this wasn't an unmanned platform casually sweeping for radar spikes. This was a stealth bomber on an active mission, and it was watching them back. Flying at high altitude, cloaked in radar-absorbent materials and shaped to deflect electromagnetic waves, the B-2 Spirit had passed into the Red Sea airspace under complete silence. Its radar cross-section, smaller than that of a bird, made it almost invisible to conventional detection systems. It wasn't just avoiding detection, it was built to be forgotten. But somehow, something had pinged, a brief radar pulse. Whatever it was, it gave the Houthis a chance to take a shot, and they took it. From a hidden SAM site dug into a rocky hillside around Al-Houda, two surface-to-air missiles streak into the night. The B-2's onboard threat receivers chirped barely. The pilot, already mid-M mission, executed a defensive maneuver and deployed countermeasures. The bomber didn't need to dive or race away. It simply let its stealth do what it was designed to do: disappear. The missiles lost their lock. No detonation, no contact, nothing. But the sensors on board the B-2 recorded everything. Launch vectors, IR signatures, missile trajectories, and most importantly, the precise coordinates of the launch site. Back at Diego Garcia, the information fed directly into a live mission channel. Within seconds, analysts flagged the origin point, mapped the surrounding terrain, and identified thermal signatures of additional equipment nearby. What the bomber had just picked up wasn't an isolated threat. It was part of a mobile launch network. While the Houthis scrambled to reposition, the U.S. Air Force had already built a full telemetry profile of the site. And here's where things shifted. Normally, an aircraft, even one as advanced as a B-2, would complete its mission, upload data post-flight, and let ground command sort out the next steps. But this night was different. The Spirit wasn't just on a recon pass, it was fully armed, loaded with GBU-57S, massive ordnance penetrators, and a suite of JD dams optimized for hardened underground targets. Command didn't need hours to make a decision. They already had one. The attack on the B-2 was considered a direct act of aggression. The order, immediate retaliation. And retaliation from a B-2 doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't involve warnings or buildup. It doesn't light up the sky with tracers. It comes in silence, with precision, and with total surprise. At high altitude, masked by clouds and curvature, the B-2 adjusted course. A new strike profile was uploaded from command. The aircraft banked south just by a few degrees, but that small correction was enough to put its payload within the perfect striking range of the Houthi site. While the rebels on the ground were still scanning the horizon for a visual confirmation of a kill, the Spirit locked in GPS coordinates and prepared to drop. The first pair of JD dams released without a sound. They fell with gravity, corrected mid-flight, and struck within 1 meter of their target. An equipment hub nestled behind a camouflaged bunker. The detonation was immediate. Secondary explosions lit up the hillside. What had once been a launch point was now a crater. But it didn't end there. 2 more bombs followed. targeting what intelligence had flagged as a hardened underground shelter, likely housing command staff or munitions. The 5,000-pound penetrators did their job. From the moment the Houthis fired to the final explosion, less than 15 minutes had passed. 15 minutes from confident launch to absolute destruction. And the B-2, it was already gone. Climbing westward, invisible, untouchable, mission complete. The B-2's presence over Yemen wasn't for show. It was sent for deep strike capability, the kind needed when surface-level bombing wouldn't cut it. This isn't a frontline aircraft. It's a strategic lever. And once it moves, you know something big is coming. And yet, even in 2025, it still shocks adversaries. Because even after decades of upgrades, countermeasures, and radar revolution, the Spirit still operates like a ghost. It's still the plane that the entire air defense networks failed to track, which made the Houthis' decision to fire on it not just dangerous, but reckless. They didn't know what they were aiming at. They didn't know what they were provoking. And they certainly didn't know that their failed strike would trigger a data stream so accurate it would allow U.S. forces to launch follow-up missions with pinpoint accuracy. Because the B-2 didn't just drop bombs that night, it painted the battlefield. It marked supply depots, mapped transmission hubs, captured thermal imagery, and fed it live to joint operation centers. It gave the U.S. analysts a real-time view into the pulse of Houthi operations. And it did it all while staying invisible. Hornets carrying GBU-38 jams and AGM-88 harms screaming towards the Yemen coastline. This was no drawn-out campaign. This was a 6-minute storm. The first targets were exactly where the B-2 said they'd be. The same SAM battery that launched those 2 SCIAD missiles. Precision bombs dropped from near stratospheric altitude, punching through layers of camouflage and concrete. Site erupted in fire and debris. A secondary explosion confirmed munitions had been hidden beneath, but the bombers didn't stop there. 2 kilometers south, a buried communications node came next. It had been silent for weeks until the moment the B-2 lit it up. One bunker buster erased it from the map. Meanwhile, as the bombers carved into the hard target, the Truman strike fighters hit Racisa. It wasn't just a port, it was a strategic artery. Fuel, money, mobility. The Houthis had assumed that the U.S. wouldn't touch it. Too civilian, too high risk. They were wrong. At 0117 local time, the first Super Hornets flew low over the Red Sea, their radar signatures masked by growler jamming. They released a surgical load of JD dams onto fuel tank clusters and underground tunnels. In under 30 seconds, multiple secondary blasts tore through the northern sector of the terminal. Thermal imagery showed hot zones igniting in sequence, a textbook chain reaction. By the time the second wave arrived, the terminal looked like a smoldering canyon of flame. But it didn't end there. Offshore, an Arleigh Burgas destroyer opened its VLS cells. 2 Tomahawk cruise missiles shot skyward and arced low over the sea. Their destination, Rosisa's southern perimeter, where intel suggested a weapons transfer was underway inside a warehouse, camouflaged as an oil storage depot. 1 missile struck the building directly. The other buried itself in a suspected tunnel entrance, collapsing the rock face above it. Total strike time, just under 6 minutes. Total targets hit 17, and the Houthis scrambling. Radios went silent mid-transmission. Radar sites powered down. Infrared imaging showed vehicles fleeing inland, many without lights, some of their doors still open. No signs of coordinated response, no retaliation. Inside the Pentagon, mission logs came back. No collateral damage outside of the designated kill box. No U.S. casualties. All primary objectives neutralized. And yet, it wasn't the destruction that made the mission historic. It was what triggered it. Because a single mistake, firing at what they thought was just a slow-moving drone, had summoned the full fury of American stealth aviation, carrier-based firepower, and precision warfare doctrine, not as revenge, but as policy. This wasn't about killing a launch site. It was about reminding everyone watching from Iran to Moscow that the U.S. doesn't need to be provoked twice. The message was loud, clear, and delivered with steel. And for the Houthis, it came with a brutal realization. They didn't just fire on a bomber. They opened the door to something they couldn't contain. By sunrise, the smoke from Rosisa was visible from space. Infrared satellites pulsed with heat signatures of what had once been a fuel terminal. Now it was a scar, blackened, broken, and still smoldering along the Red Sea coast. Inside Houthi territory, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The moment Package Alpha ended, local radio traffic dropped to near zero. What little chatter remained was panicked, fragmented. Some units reported losing contact with Central Command. Others never checked in again. Ground sensors picked up scattered figures fleeing on foot, abandoning convoys. But there was no public statement, no official declaration of retaliation, only silence and smoke. The Houthis knew what had happened. They just underestimated how fast the US would respond and how deeply it could strike without warning. For years, Rosisa had stood as a strategic blind spot. Even during the height of the Saudi-led airstrikes, the terminal was left untouched. The decision to hit Rosisa wasn't random. It wasn't just about fuel or revenge. It was about leverage. The terminal didn't just store oil. It powered logistics, funded drone production, and served as a nexus for encrypted communications across Western Yemen. U.S. intelligence had tracked its rise for months, building a case for its role not as infrastructure but as a military node. The moment a B-2 came under fire, that designation changed from theory to target. And so did the rules. Within 24 hours of the strike, oil markets shifted. Defense analysts across the globe scrambled to interpret what had just happened. Had the U.S. crossed a red line, or had the Houthis forced Washington's hand? On encrypted channels, internal Houthi messages reflected something deeper than panic. They showed confusion, repeated queries about lost radar systems, inquiries about jammed GPS signals, rumors of a cyber attack, officers demanding answers from headquarters that no longer existed. What they didn't realize was that the B-2's data package hadn't just enabled a retaliatory strike, it had collapsed an entire communication framework. Key relays were gone, command nodes severed, mobile launch units fried before they could be relocated. It wasn't just fuel that burned at Rosisa, it was tempo.